Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa, Idris, with me Sharaad, Kuttan. And on the show today we have the former Education Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. We have with us Thakur S, Powdyel. Now, we were just going to get into this before the break, but we are curious to know your personal journey. I mean, how did you end up becoming the Education Minister from 2008 to 2013?
I'm a village boy, born and brought up in a remote village called Dorokha in southwest Bhutan. Went to my village school initially and moved on to the district school, went to India to do my further studies and joined the education ministry. In my time, graduates coming from universities had a lot of options. There were more job opportunities, openings. Then there were a number of people who had to actually take these important responsibilities up. So in my time, there were just 30 graduates in the country. So we could pick and choose any ministry in the government. However, I decided to be a teacher. I decided to be an educator. And to this day, I'm so grateful that I made that decision.
And why? Well, what is it about teaching that attracts you?
You know, teaching is something that you cannot take as a job or employment. You have to feel that it depends upon your passion, your convictions. You have to believe that education is important and follow that light. And education is so very important for societies, for individuals, institutions, and for the country. Any nation that does well does so thanks to education. Education succeeding, no nation can fail. Education failing, no nation can succeed. So when I became, when the people entrusted that responsibility of looking after the education system in the country, it was actually a continuation of my role as a teacher. The only difference was that the size of my classroom became much wider to cover the whole country.
So yes. You're also known as the most widely foot-traveled education minister in the world. What does that mean? That means you were traveling across the country on foot to visit schools, or?
I think some of my colleagues have been very kind to attribute that, that honor, I must say, on me. You know, Bhutan is a small country, but once you start walking, it expands, it becomes big. And to get from one point to another takes a long, long time. And many of our schools are located in very remote hamlets, in distant places. And it was important for me to travel to these schools, meet my fellow teachers, meet the children, their parents, the community. I owed it to them to visit them and to see how they lived and how they worked. So it was a deeply educative and insightful journey for me. I wouldn't travel outside the country so much as the education minister. I would ask my colleagues to do the job of traveling as much as they could. But I would travel inside the country.
Within the country.
Yes. It was important for me to know the realities of our school.
Right, so you were encountering a reality and learning from that experience. But what about the models you brought to it? I mean, from a pedagogical point of view, what have you been influenced by? Are you looking around the world for ways of thinking about education? And did you use that to apply to the Bhutan context?
There is so much going on around the world in the name of education, but not all of it is education. So today's education addresses mostly the claims of the mind, the claims of the intellect. But the mind or the intellect is not the end all and be all of education. There are so many other elements that make us who we are, that make the children who they are. So when we collect the most precious segment of the population of the society, that is the children, young men and women, in our schools, colleges, and universities, and keep them there for extended periods of time, education has got to be purposeful, it's got to be worthwhile, meaningful. So, as much as we were looking around the world for good models, we also had to look deep into ourselves. We had to look into the soul of education. Long ago, some great minds described education as the noble sector. It had to be the noble sector. No other sector of public service has ever been called the noble sector, but education was. Education is actually dedicated to helping young men and women, boys and girls, cultivate the nobility of their mind, cultivate the nobility of their heart, thereby leading to cultivate the nobility of action. So when the head and the heart and the hands are aligned properly and nobly, the result of such educational efforts would be preparation of young men and women who will be good citizens, who will be good individuals, and who will serve the society and the nation and the world well. So that is something that we were doing, looking into education from its deep core.
So when you look at policy making for education, how do you do that through the filter of the gross national happiness perspective? How do you make sure that education policy is in line to the pillars of that, the sustainability through preservation of culture, through making sure that societal development is equitable? How do you filter that educational guideline in that mold?
Oh, that's so very important. I was talking about the North Star. And if a nation has a North Star, the subsystems of the nation will have to follow the North Star as well. And education is an extremely important subsystem of any nation. So the Ministry of Education in Bhutan had to embrace this responsibility of doing its part to advance the goals of the country, gross national happiness goals. Gross national happiness as a development architecture, development vision, is founded on 4 important comprehensive pillars: equitable and balanced socio-economic development, preservation of our culture and tradition, conservation of our natural environment, and promotion of good governance. And we have what is called the Planning Commission. It was called the Planning Commission erstwhile. Erstwhile it was called the Planning Commission. The same Planning Commission has now been renamed as the Gross National Happiness Commission. And this commission has to do the same job as any other planning commission does. Do the policy making and preparation of plans, mobilizing resources, allocation of resources, and also monitoring. So all the government departments and the ministries preparing the annual and the 5-year plans would have to submit their programs and plans to this Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission, the Gross National Happiness Commission, vets all the projects.
It has to make sure everything is in line with that.
Yes, it has to, yes. And if there's any program that is incompatible with the principles of gross national happiness, they will be rejected and they will not get state funding. So they have to be revised and submitted to the Planning Commission, Gross National Happiness Commission. And if the Planning Commission is satisfied that they meet the guidelines, the principles of GNH, then they get approved and receive state funding. Education is within that broad, umbrella.
We'll find out a little bit more the concrete elements of this after this right here on the show. So stay with us. We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.